this whole idea of Paramatma and Atma, if you were to look at it from a very scientific perspective, obviously that's not, all the way possible all the time. But it goes back to and the reason I'm asking this question is because in physics, for instance, we have been trying to go to the very kind of fundamental block, the building block, so to say. We've been looking at the particles, the quarks and gluons and so on. And we have reached a kind of a plateau of sorts. We have reached a dead end in a certain manner of speaking, because we now have a whole plethora of elementary particles. And the experiments that we have are not yet kind of giving us any new insight as it stands into how that can be unified, right? How that can be brought under one conceptual umbrella. Moving away from Ayurveda a little, you have also lately explored the realm of reality at its most fundamental. And this includes your work on conceptualizing Sunyata, right, in terms of quantum physics. And this is right up my alley, so to say. So in your chapter on Sunyata in the book, Quantum Reality and the Theory of Shunya, you say that space is a product of the Big Bang singularity, but it can be posited that the Big Bang singularity itself is a state before which everything was pure existence and consciousness, or ānīdavātam. And in modern scientific parlance, what do you mean by this whole idea of space emerging from pure existence and consciousness?
So I'm trained spectroscopist, right. So I normally jump into that. Because I explore. Spectroscopy is really the way to look at. Spectroscopy of various things. Looking at the vibrational or oscillational, translational, some kind of motions. Right. And so in Rig Veda, it says everything was still. Yes. Now, when everything is still, there is no way you see it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Right. It's like, sometimes, when I was a little, sometimes we'll do something that we don't want to be noticed, so then we'll just still, nobody knows, so this entire universe also can go still. Right. There was a physicist, I don't know whether they still have in Princeton, where they were not talking about this Big Bang. Right. and arrow of time. They were talking about oscillating universe. Yes. So what we are seeing is contraction and expansion, which is more like what they talk about in Indian cosmology. Yes. So there is a concept of things not moving and then moving. Now, you can define that move as oscillation, translation, or vibration. And this is where we try to think about it. Now, in terms of Sunyata, I have delved into this whole idea just to make an argument to people. The other kind of there are people who question it by using and rightly they question it. I don't have any objection to that, but they kind of come up with question like, what is that? Zero means nothing. Well, yeah, ultimately it goes to nothing. Everything goes to nothing. I mean, if it doesn't move, it's nothing for you. Right. If you don't move, you're nothing for anybody. Yes. You're dead because you didn't move. Yeah. So it's kind of easy to understand. Now, mathematically, I find it very fascinating that zero and infinity, right, and which is what I try to write into that one rationally in my article. And I'm still very fascinated with that. Actually, I asked a question yesterday to an engineer from IIT Kharagpur. What is infinity minus infinity? Right. I mean, you probably know this. It's indeterminate. You don't know.
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's indeterminate. Yeah.
So now, but in reality, I tell you what, in infinity, you can see it. Yeah. You can see infinity, which is what some of these Vaidyas, Ayurveda, Rishi, Munis, sages, they are more practical. This is where biology is better than physics. I'm sorry about, your field is physics. So, or at least physics can learn something from biology.
Right, right.
If you really, I define this, I think I've written an article, or at least I wrote a poem in English actually, about a daughter is infinite, because daughter can produce perfect daughter and remains a daughter. So, and you have infinite potential in daughter, and it produces another infinite and remains infinite. Right. So infinity minus infinity remains infinity, which is, by the way, is Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnamudachyate. I mean, in physics, it makes no sense, but in biology, it makes sense. So approaching these things from biological system is better. I'm talking about, maybe you will agree with me. and which would mean then you're talking about the consciousness, the concept of Sunyata. It's up to me. I can get into the Sunyas, whatever senses that I want to talk about. Let's say sensory Sunya. So, I mean, there is in yoga, there is a concept of pratyahar.
Yes,
so you have yam, niyam, asan, pranayam, then you have pratyahar. And I see the yam, niyam, asan, pranayam is to know everything as much as you could know. And then you say, that's it. I'm now all the things that I knew, I can give it up. It's like you have, a lot of people have no money, but that is very different than people who have lots of money and give it up. So that is the difference in Sunya and infinity, by the way. You get every possible damn thing and then bring it to zero.
Yeah.
So then zero has a connection to now infinity. And that's just a biologically and socially, you can connect this. Mathematically, I'm sure you connect. I mean, I wrote, like they used to have a dot. I read about it, that the zero was not written like this. It was just an infinitesimally small dot, which has no shape, no space. That was supposed to be like that. That's zero. I kind of understand that. There's nothing there, obviously, by definition. But now they did this circular thing, and there is no end and beginning of that also. Right. So that also is another infinite. So zero is really the mother of infinite.
Absolutely. Wonderfully put. Yeah. So very specifically in that formulation, you speak about the quantum void essentially, and that is something which I have studied extensively in the past few years. So the quantum field theory, contemporary quantum field theory, talks of field-specific vacuum, right? So there is a vacuum state for the various quantum fields that we have. While Oriental traditions, both Vedanta as well as Buddhism for that matter, speak of the void that is attained via negativa, right, or neti, as it is popularly said. So if you say that the void you have conceptualized has a certain amount of, let's say, energy and specific kinds of attributes, because the void or the vacuum, at least for the quantum fields, are not attribute-less. I mean, they have certain kinds of inherent attributes which can be excited, and then then there are various particles that can come from there. So when we are speaking of this as the void that we have from ancient times, is it not true that that which is not described by this void, right, surely lies beyond its ambit, right? This modern void that we are talking about, there are various things which are not within its ambit, right? So that cannot be the void that we are talking about when it comes to the ancient, the Shunya, as we are kind of trying to describe it, because this is falling just short of describing that ultimate void, right, which is beyond all degrees of freedom and properties, essentially. So how do we reconcile the two? And if we can even reconcile the two, because that has been something which I kind of noticed and I wanted to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the first thing, I wouldn't argue with a quantum physicist to try to make my point. So, I mean, I will learn more from you. I mean, this is something, like I said, spectroscopy is related to quantum. So I know, and I did teach chemistry of mind. I taught several courses in which I do use quantum. I'm not the expert of quantum, but I know I'm familiar with it. Now, with that, let me delve into your question. So, yeah, I think what I think my understanding is, first of all, that as a scientist, we always try to approach things from what we know to what we don't know. So we don't know. I mean, that could be just completely void as far as, practical things concerned. I just don't know. So, but I approach it from what I know. And can I really know that? So now rationally, zero is nothing. Let's say I assume there's nothing, and maybe I can even attribute that this is ultimate void. Right. But mathematically, all the negative numbers and all positive numbers come from there. Right. You have -1, you have +1, and that becomes zero. You have -2, +2. You have minus infinity, plus infinity. They get into that. Even though mathematically it will be a problem, but we know physiologically or rationally it makes sense. Yes. What if you can create infinite of exactly same? I mean, infinite cannot be exactly same, because then it's not infinite. Right. But if you, let's say, infinite numbers, we were talking about, on infinite number of people, infinite whatever, and if you can do that, you can get the opposites to become, and then now you have to create infinite number of opposites and you can bring them to it. Goes back to the same question that you started asking earlier. Can we really do the algorithm of all this stuff? I mean, this thing starts right from there. But now when you talk about in Vedic view or Buddhist view or Jain's view, it is really biology, then it plays a role. And I mean, I say biology because that's the only thing I know. I think it's probably more like a darshan.
Right.
I wouldn't call it even philosophy, because philosophy stops at the level of hypothesis and assumptions, and then you can make an argument. But when you say darshan, only equivalent of that is that, you know, you do experiment and see the results.
Right.
So darshan is at that level, but it is talking about something that you and I do not necessarily have access to.
Right. Right.
So it is of those people who reach that level. I'm assuming that it means there is a potential.
Right.
So what you're talking about is ultimate void.
Right.
It's not visible, but has potential.
Right.
And that's just a concept.
Yes.
And that I'm assuming, and not because I'm not going to question this to people who have been able to get there. I have never been there, but I am assuming that there are people who can get there. There was a study which I think I quoted in there of in 2006, published in Science magazine, about consciousness and unconsciousness. So let's say everything is that you and I can talk about, think about, relate to, understand is consciousness.
Right.
Not just awareness, just, you know, anything that you can even imagine.
Yes.
And then what is unconsciousness? Whatever is left. And what in this experiments, this thing they did, you know, buying car, when there are 4 features, like maybe color, maybe the engine power, maybe the size of the car and whatever, and the seats, let's say 4 things, people make conscious decision.
Right.
And then they made 12 features, you know, the pedal, the light size, and this, whatever, you just can imagine 12 items. Then they went by unconscious, whatever the gut feeling is. So that means this exists, but I don't know, which you don't know, what you might call at the very extreme of it, the ultimate void, which is a governing, because at least at this very small scale, 12 versus 4 is conscious, 12 is unconscious, which I'm now going to refer to it at the very simple baby step void. Right. Because there's something that you are not aware of it, but it happens. It has potential to affect us.
I think this connects directly to, you know, the most fundamental question, I think, which people who belong both to the modern Occidental kind of, you know, way of thinking and the, you know, the ancient Oriental or Indic way of thinking, because so the idea that, you know, reality itself at the most fundamental is often said to be beyond space, time, and causality, right? As we know it, it's been mentioned in the Upanishads, it's been mentioned elsewhere as well. And even in the Rig Veda, for that matter, in the, you know, the Nasadya Sukta, for instance, it talks about the final kind of demolition of the binary, right? They say that which exists, that which neither exists nor not exists, essentially. Right, so there is that transcendence, transcending that final barrier as well. And whereas in modern times, obviously, there is what is known as accessible empiricism, right? So now the methods to go beyond, right, in the Oriental traditions are suggested to be experiential, right? That's the whole idea. And in terms of the modern scientific framework, it's purely speculative for quite a few, scientists for that matter. So how do we even kind of think or begin with reconciling these, you know, this fundamental barrier in validation of the same, right? Because even if we were to see the most advanced, you know, experimental setup today, right? Let's say in physics with the Large Hadron Collider, where you're colliding particles at very high energy, that is still a small fraction of what the universe's, you know, energy at the very beginning of time, let's say at the Big Bang was, essentially. And we may not be able to reach there at any point in time, essentially, right? So we cannot possibly have an accessible, you know, empirical kind of validation of the same, but we have got this tradition that has told us all these aspects. So this whole reconciliation is a very difficult subject to kind of, you know, delve with and address. So I would like to know your views on this matter.
Very, very fascinating, actually, aspect that I'm also very interested in, and I have opinion.
Yeah.
Because, you know, one of the fundamental greatness that I have experienced in my life is that I get students, So when you have a student, then you can't tell that I don't know.
Yes.
I mean, you have to tell something.
Yeah.
And so you come up with some ideas about explaining all this. And so I think the way I approach this, there's multiple ways to approach this. Well, first of all, we just assume that these people who, whatever they have gotten, they got from somewhere, because it's already, that is exists, that's verifiable,
Yeah.
that they have come up ideas, and many of these ideas at some level can be tested. Not all of them, many of them can be tested. Ayurveda is one of those examples of that, and yoga is an example of that. Now the question is, how do we now approach the ultimate one? So you have to follow, there is a methodology. If I want to learn about physics, I have to train under some physicists, right? And the training is not enough. Although unfortunately these days people get PhD degree and they think that is the accomplishment. That is the beginning of the, whatever you would imagine that there will be accomplishment. I mean, I will be petrified if my students, all they learn in my lab, that's all they're going to retain all their life. I will be petrified. That's many times people in India particularly, they think they got PhD, now that's it. They're all set with that. So then the question of how to approach is to learn, be trained, and pursue it, which is very very commonly known in everything that we do, other than some lazy people who don't want to do something. Most people who really are curious, they will pursue it their own way. Now the question then is that what I see, how would you verify it?
Right.
What I see, how would you verify it? So they have actually, from what I understand the tradition, and I do yoga. The part of the reason I started all this is because with somebody who did not believe in yoga at all. Right. I did not want even to listen to these people who were telling yoga. I thought science is it, and we are chemists and we know everything and we are going to explain everything. But in 1999 and 2000, I learned about yoga, and some of the stuff that I'm telling today, and actually I started chemistry of mind class in 2001. Once I learned a little bit about yoga, I was convinced. So I wanted to explore, and I'm a professor. So the way to explore intellectually is really do it, practice it. And so I think that it needs to be practiced. And then how, your question was alluding to the conceptually, the verifiability of one from the other, and conceptually, what is it? So in Indian tradition, it's like very simple, in my opinion. It says, Aham Brahmasmi. Now you have to become it. And when, again, mathematically, if you are Brahm and I'm Brahm, and which means you are no different than I am, to you cannot have, you cannot imagine that Balram Singh is different than Mrittunjoy. You have to see. Now, if you really think about that, you can get gist of these things. It gets gist of these things in families. You get gist of things in the society. You get gist of the things on the whole planet. You get gist of this in the whole universe. You can get there, and that is the clue. That can you do that? Can I really feel like Mrittunjoy is the same as I am? If I could do that, that will be possible. Now, let me plug in a little bit of my family background. I come from a joint family. And in joint family, we are 7th generation. We are living together. 7th generation. Try to find that Mrittunjoy somewhere.
Absolutely. That's
5 generations.
Unheard of in today's times.
Yeah. And so I have some ideas from practical experience and observations. My brother would never play, carry, buy anything, take care of his children. It was my responsibility as an uncle. It has been practiced all through my family. I've talked about my father, talked about my uncle. They don't. Now, what I'm trying to say with this, they attach, my son is not just your son is my son also. Right. I have to feel the same way. This is a practical training in Indian society. Now that's why they call parahit, paramarth, means others is important in practice, so that you can feel someday, I would, socially at least I'm the same. I'm considering you to be the same. We all consider each other's mothers as mothers. It's very, very important in the society. And there is a story in Indian Puranas about how Brahma once, people were upset, the asuras and asuras were upset that they are not treated that well. And Brahmaji invited, just to tell very, very quickly, he invited them for dinner, and he tied a stick in their hand and said that whosoever eats fast without wasting food will be the winner. And Rakshasas or Asuras, they tried to eat, but they made a big mess of it. And the other side, they fed each other. And what I'm just telling, in my family, I have seen practice. Now, this is the first step of connecting to each other. But that's just the only first baby step. The reality is that, today I'm talking to you as a physicist and I'm trying to learn something from you. And I'm a chemist, and whatever knowledge I have, you're trying to learn something. So then we respect each other and unite. And eventually, so I think I am trying to give the very social, biological, family way how we can be the same. The one Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, when I am Nija Paroveti Ganana Laguchet Sam. Means if I'm saying that I'm this and you are different, then it is people who are narrow-minded. So from there to Aham Brahmasmi is a journey that I think people should pursue. I would suggest that scientists get trained in this process.
Very good.
Scientists should get my view is that like when I was a graduate student, I don't know about you, you went to Cambridge, right? So I don't know in US at that time, there was a requirement of foreign language. Right. And you had to learn foreign language. Why? Because there is some knowledge in foreign language. In today, I think to become a scientist, you should be a certified yoga practitioner. Because then you have to have this detached view, because you want to be objective. Why you want to be objective? Because so that you don't want to be biased. But that means you have convinced yourself that I'm going to be biased. That's why objective. But if you can be subjective and and unbiased, which unbiased means I consider you the same as I am.
And I think
that's how I think the process that you're talking about, that is how the process perhaps can begin.
Yeah, that's a very important point, because I think that's the truly scientific process. I mean, there are a lot of people who have, even in the scientific world for that matter, there are a lot of people who have a certain idea, a set pattern, a set idea, almost dogmatic kind of, inclination towards a certain framework. And without having extensively kind of looked at it, searched for it, and proven it, which is technically the scientific way, they assume that a certain subset, maybe let's say, cannot be the right theory, let's say, right? So I think in that manner, I mean, the yoga and the Ayurvedic and the Indic kind of traditions have the truly scientific way of pursuing truth, if you were to put it in that manner. You speak of complex matter by self-organization in nature as well in one of your works, and this is obviously very interesting to our viewers and to all of us, because this year's Nobel Prize for Physics also has gone to somebody who has worked on complex matter. So I myself have been looking at self-organization and the manner in which it happens, but even before we go into the idea of self-organization, something that is very important is to understand what is the axiomatic, almost essential basis for the universe as you conceptualize it, right? So is it an entity? Is it a principle? Is it a process, right? And what self-organizes, right? And why does it self-organize? And most importantly, can we even speak of a why for the self-organization in the first place, right? So I would like to know your views on that.
You mean you're talking about physical material things, self-organization, yes, or everything?
Yeah, at the fundamental level of reality. I mean, if you were to think of everything, the multiplicity arising from this idea of self-organization, what is the axiomatic basis or the starting point, or let's say the building blocks essentially, right? Is it an entity, a principle, or a process? What self-organizes and how and why, for that matter?
Well, I wish I knew.
Sorry? Yeah.
I wish I knew.
Right.
But I think, let's just delve into some conversation about it as to, why, things self-organize. What is the destiny, right? How they're destined to certain things. So, a very practical example, which is very social and maybe will make a sense. Human rights.
Right.
So we say we are humans. And we should have certain rights because we are humans. So how did you get to be a human? How did we get? It's okay. I understand that everybody is. So there is something in the process, and that process is very, very critical.
Right.
Let's say there is a concept of karma.
Right.
So you become human because you do certain karma.
Right.
And then now here the idea was like, well, we are just born.
Yes.
We become human being. But no, there is a basis for that. Now it goes back to the discussion we have had earlier, from my point of view, is that what is karma? I studied Jain philosophy,
Right.
because I ran teacher training for 11 years, high school teachers in America. And they were, I was training them about 4 dharmic traditions of India. And so in the process, I got exposure, better exposure to these things. So Jains have this, they call karmanu, just like karmani. We have parmanu, they have a karmanu. And they have, and they also have, they talk about the same thing, that vibration thing we talked about earlier. So now this is the karma. So when you talk about something organizing, the karma is not only about human being. We only think about human beings, but karma, because vibration is in everything. And so what you call as self-organization, if that self has to be connected in philosophical Indic tradition, the self is really Atma. Self really becomes Atma. And Atma and Paramatma are connected. So the organization is, when we say self, is because of the creation. And I don't mean the creation means the God was making human beings like that. I'm just talking about the how the process, like you were talking about earlier, is oscillation, is spandan, is started. So that is the basis of this self-organization, whatever we become. But now why something becomes, why Mrittunjoy becomes Mrittunjoy, Balram Singh becomes Balram Singh? How is that related to that? Well, it is related to karma and the krida or leela of this. That is the nature of that, to do this. Why does that happen? That happens because that is the only way we realize. When I say we, means whatever that it is, it realizes that it exists. Like, if unless I get up in the morning, I don't exist. People won't know me. Right. So I have organized myself in such a way that people see me. Right. Because I get up and call, I picked up on your connection, and otherwise you will say, well, what happened to him? He didn't exist. So I organized myself in this sense so that you can see me. Right. So that also organizes what is that, whatever that is. Just the one that is the same as we say namaste, that one, whatever that, Paramatma. Then Atma and Paramatma are connected, and the game is to realize, self-realize. And that's why self-organizes.
Right. But I mean, in this whole idea of Paramatma and Atma, if you were to look at it from a very scientific perspective, obviously that's not all the way possible all the time, but it goes back to and the reason I'm asking this question is because in physics, for instance, we have been trying to go to the very kind of fundamental block, the building block, so to say. We've been looking at the particles, the quarks and gluons and so on, and we have reached a kind of a plateau of sorts. We have reached a dead end in a certain manner of speaking, because we now have a whole plethora of elementary particles, and the experiments that we have are not yet kind of giving us any new insight as it stands into how that can be unified, right? How that can be brought under one conceptual umbrella. So the whole idea of, what is self-organizing in a very kind of physicalist, obviously that may not be possible, because even within physics, there are theories of, higher dimensions, for instance, right, which cannot be accessed within our 3+1 dimensions, within our spatial and time dimensions. But I mean, still, there is this whole thing about there being some signs or some traces of that in our physical universe itself. So that is why I was very interested in knowing about it. You state that consciousness, right? And you speak about that in a fair few of your essays and writings. Consciousness is a general concept of existence of any and all things known and unknown, and is universal, right? So I'm very curious to know, how do you describe and quantify consciousness, right? Especially of things like, an inanimate object, for instance, right? Can you even do that? And are you trying to equate consciousness to, let's say, complexity, right? Like there are some theories in modern science, like the integrated information theory, which tries to look at the complexification, the complexities of the body and the system. So are you equating that to the complexity? And how do you describe it for an inanimate object and so on?
Fascinating question. So there are so multiple approaches, even to go back to your earlier the idea of how self-organization happens.
Yes.
How we have our lens. Right. We like to see everything from what we know, what we can feel, and we may even agree. Now, physics, I'll come to this consciousness thing. I just want to address the other question that you have. In physics, the language of physics is mathematics, really. And in mathematics, when I learned my simple calculus, integration, it says integration of everything from minus infinity to plus infinity. Yeah. And that's how, of course, then we say x1, x2. Yes. So, because we limit ourselves. So our understanding of even self-organization is by self, what we think we can understand. Most of the time, it is our perceptions, the sensory perceptions, which is very limiting. This will then lead, one more point, and then I'll get to the other question that you have. One more point is that I have a friend of mine who is a parapsychologist, and he told me a story, an event. There was a professor in Rutgers University, some scientist came to give a talk, and he asked something about science. And I kind of think that he told me that was a Nobel laureate or somebody, but somebody very prominent scientist. And he asked the audience, how many of you do your research based on some hypothesis? Right. And when I write to an NIH grant, I had to write my hypothesis. Right. All of them raised. And so he said, so now none of you are a scientist because you're already biased.
Right, absolutely.
The moment you have hypothesis, you are biased. So the whole idea of looking at anything else is based on what we are trying to, that's what you're saying. The physicist is trying to find out based on what we think. Unless you become what it is, you are willing to do, which is what we had been talking about earlier, when void and, get to the zero and infinite, whatever, absolute void, the essential void, the very beginning of the void. I have to get there. I cannot force everything to come to me, which is what our ahankara is, our ego is, and we are trying to understand. Now, going back to your question about the consciousness of whatever it is. Well, if you really talk about vibration, then everywhere it is. I have vibration, every stone has vibration, no problems. That will be a common thing to say, talk about consciousness, and that's very, very easy. Everything is conscious because nothing exists. Even the nuclear, there is a nuclear motion. Electron, there is electron motion. The quarks also moving, and the whole quantum idea comes from there because you don't know where there's going to be. All kind of uncertainty principle and everything. So I think that's where the idea is in consciousness. But the consciousness that we normally define to ourselves, that awareness. Now, my awareness of a coronavirus is absolutely zero unless I start coughing, and that may not even be that. But a dog can be trained today. Actually, the best diagnostic tool right now we have is a dog.
Right.
And it can identify 10 molecules of not corona, but corona created molecules in somebody's body. Right. So it can smell and say this person is infected, and 10 molecules. There is no way RT-PCR can do that. Right. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is the consciousness or awareness, as people think, is very different. A snake cannot hear, but can feel the vibrations. So a snake's awareness is vibration. I and you may not be able to feel vibrations at all unless something is really very loud. So this is kind of very, very gross level. At the very subtle level, consciousness is even the unconsciousness is a consciousness, because we know that there is unconsciousness, and that can be playing a major role. Now, this can be, life is in, science, I feel, and I think we should posit this idea that science is something to be pursued, not to achieve. Because the moment you achieved, said, I achieved this, well, there is more to go. And if you said that I achieved this and I got it, and that's it, that means you're not a scientist. Because a scientist, neti, you just said, earlier in one of your questions, neti actually proves, because Because neti is actually, you were talking about controls. Actually, neti is only control.
Right.
You ultimately run all the controls and you find out, oh, that's me. Not that. And I have some ideas. I think we would like to create some kind of epistemology, science differently than what it is right now. And that, Schrodinger has tried to do that. Niels Bohr tried to do some of those things. And in modern times, Penrose and other people are trying to do that. I think what is lacking and maybe relevant to your program is, why not Indian scientists do this? Sir J.C. Bose was the last one I remember, maybe the first and the last one in modern times, who really brought Indian tradition and showed it to people. Like, look, this is what it is, and defined it to others. And so I think that that's the only example I know. I know there are great scientists in India, and certainly a greatest potential India has, and for a variety of reasons beyond our conversation today, the topic of our conversation today. I think India has humongous potential. It's a very special country. I'm not saying it because I'm from India. I've lived outside and lived many places, and I've dealt with a lot of people. And so Indian scientists should take it, because you have this collaborative thing, natural collaboration from various fields, integration. We do not divide things, but if you divide things, that's fine. Then integrate them. We divide only to integrate them. And if we use that approach, I think we will get there. At least we will get better place. I don't know whether we will get there, because if we get there, then we fail, because we are not scientists anymore. Once you get there, you got it, then you're not scientists anymore, because you have to pursue it further.
So you raised a couple of points there. So one was on Roger Penrose, you mentioned, and I will come to that in a bit. But even this whole idea of reality itself being something as an absolute. It having an objective reality, as it is said. You spoke about epistemology, but let's go at it from the ontological point of view. Can we even speak of reality beyond the way in which various things can represent it? So what I mean by that is there a representational reality that we have out there, a representational relational reality, or do we have something which can be beyond that in terms of there being an absolute reality in the first place? Because even in physics, for that matter, in quantum physics, for that matter, and in ancient Indic texts, there have been, these discussions about how the final reality, right, is not accessible in the manner of, empiricism, essentially, right? So when a simple example that people often give is that when we are talking about a rose, we are talking about the color, the aroma, and all the other attributes. But are we actually describing the rose? Is the reality of the rose being represented per se? So my question to you would be, can we even talk about something beyond the representative nature of reality as it is accessible to us? And can we take this as an invitation to go towards the experiential side, which could possibly give us a window to look beyond just that, essentially? I would like to know your views on that.
Yeah, I agree. I think you have to, but you have to begin. So science is, like I said earlier, science is a good place to begin. It is not a good place to end. Right. Unfortunately, many times people, I have this phrase I made up just a couple of weeks ago, that we know 10 to the power minus 50% of what the world is. Right. Now somebody says, how do you know? Why? I said, you prove me wrong. So we know very little. Yes. Our problem is that we know it can be proven. The 10 to the power minus 50% is, I can prove it by mathematically. How much we know, how many molecules are, how many vibrations are there, whatever, the whole galaxy. I think I'm overestimating our knowledge. 10 to the power minus 50% is the overestimation. So then we really do not know. But that doesn't mean we should not begin. We can begin to know. So ontologically, obviously this world exists. Ontologically, we don't know. Right. Ontologically, we don't know. I think if we start from there, then epistemology will start. Right. And epistemology should not be limited to one way. Right. Just like science should not be limited to only physics or chemistry or biology. These things were not even known a couple hundred years ago. They were not known. People had very different way of knowing. when this herbal medicine has been there for thousands, the Bhasma has been there thousands of years. Nobody knew this chemistry. They had their own way of, their own epistemology, their own way of testing, like floating things and putting in the finger and see whether it fits in the line between the lines. They had their own ideas about it. But the basis of that, even how that start, is it starts with the sense. You say the rose, the plants. I and you look at the plant differently than a Vaidya will look at, and an animal will look at it. I've been very fascinated because we use animals in our science. We use animals and we kill them, and we kill them in a sense because we have toxin we are working with, make sure that whether they're dying or not dying. But I was very fascinated how the Vaidya people did it. How did they develop this whole product line? They use their senses. And they also, somebody told me in Banaras Hindu University once I was visiting, that they also did animal studies. I said, what do you mean? They observed animals.
Oh, right.
They didn't treat them with the stuff that they wanted to. They observed animals. When animal gets sick, then it doesn't eat. The first thing it starts, we're talking about earlier about microbiome and the stomach being the problem and solution of everything. Yes. The animal knows it. Automatically knows it. An animal. So they said that they observe many of these Vaidyas, they observe animals. They learn from animals. Right. In Indian tradition, there is a tradition of worshipping animals. Right. There is a tradition of worshipping plants. There is a tradition of worshipping organisms, and there is a tradition of worshipping nothing. Right. whatever else is left. Absolutely. Just in case. What a great idea of epistemology, a practical behavior, learning, practicing, and preaching. Right. Telling people. And there are many people who in India traditionally a lot of things is still being done. What is that plant has? Yeah. Well, in Ayurvedic philosophy, from what I understand, and I'm trying to practice it. I've created an app in my village, and we are trying to divide this whole world according to Ayurvedic map. Oh. We are making an Ayurvedic map because as a biologist in me, I work with cranberry plants here locally. The ozone spray is here only 25 miles away from here, from my campus. And so I interacted with them. They had invited me. I started the whole gambit of things. What are the things I learned? They were very, very, very kind to me. But one of the things that I learned out of that, cranberry plants grown in Massachusetts is the capital of cranberries, Massachusetts, because ozone spray is here. But Oregon, same plant, you need 8,000 hours of cold treatment.
Oh, right.
In Massachusetts, 5,000. Same plant.
Right.
Yes, differently. What I'm saying, the locality makes difference. The locality doesn't mean the temperature. Temperature is the same. But it requires 8,000 there, 5,000 here, because there are other things. The plant can sense better than you and I. We just try to make the house exactly same way here, exactly same way there, which is what I was talking about earlier, uniformity. Yes. We try to create uniformity because that's convenient to us. But plants don't look for that. Reality is not like, there is no uniform thing. Yeah. The things are changing. So going back to this, how to create epistemology is to learn from animals. So animals, they are learned that when animals sick, first thing it starts eating. Secondly, when it feels better, however that sense works, it only eats certain plants, not all the plants. So they found out that for this kind of problem, this animal eats this. So we learn from the animal. Right. We don't be thinking that we are great people. The only thing I think there is a greatness in human beings, if we can agree to that and realize that, is that we have the sense of knowing how much we don't know.
Right, absolutely. Yeah.
And if we did that, I think we will be doing a great ontology. Yes. And will follow a great epistemology.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is my last question, and it's only fitting that Kal or time, as in the ancient Indic thought, was so preeminent, so important. You mentioned about Roger Penrose, and obviously I have met him myself in Cambridge, and obviously he's a very, very kind of eminent professor of physics who has given this idea of cyclic cosmology, the whole model that there is the progression from the Big Bang to the big crunch and to the big bang again, and so on. So the universe comes out of a singularity, it expands, it then again contracts and goes back into a singularity, and then it keeps on happening. And you mentioned, I think, in one of your writings, and even today, about the whole cyclicity of time, right? So I'm very curious as to how you kind of, what would motivate you. I mean, I have some thoughts on this matter. Because Roger Penrose also, when he talks about the cyclicity, he's rather talking about a certain kind of linearity still. I mean, it's not circular, it's cyclic rather, whereas you talk about circular time, essentially. So I would like to know your thoughts about that as well.
So I think the first of all, the in terms of arrowness or straight movement of time, it is when you fix the moment for a certain period, the whatever, if you're looking for my lifetime, yeah, it's moving in arrow. But if you're moving maybe millions of people after me, maybe millions of generations, that may not be arrow. It's just like, the land looks flat where I am, but it's really not because we know that the earth is. And I mean, some people in America, they still have a society, the flat Earth Society, the flat Earth Society. They still think that we are scientists are fooling them because, they want to believe in that. And that's okay. I think if they didn't exist, I think I wouldn't be as useful or as knowledgeable. I'm glad that they do exist. So that is that one. In terms of, I got fascinated with the yoga.
Right.
And so I started following the yoga. There is some cyclic behavior, geothermal behavior in the galaxy, of course. Everything moves, and then also the Earth moves. So everything is kind of a cycle. And I picked up on that. Like there is a ice age, for example. So even I'm not talking about the whole universe that Penrose is talking about, just to understand, because like I said, we have to start from whatever we know. Yeah. So we know that there is a season, of course, and then there is the cycle of cold ice age that comes. Everything becomes very cold, and then slowly begins again. And we are in some cycle of the latest, I think 30,000-40,000 years ago, there was an ice age. So it's like there is a cycle, everything goes in cycle. And that's why I think I was initially thinking about that. In my late thinking is a little bit different. Actually, I'm not just only cyclic and circular. I was thinking about circular at that time. Cyclic is a different. Yes. Now, coming from biology background and something I got very fascinated with, something called beauty. Okay. And I have Saree as it was my inspiration. Okay. The why that these days people don't wear that much sari, but they used to, and then I thought about that as a helix, right. In the DNA. Yes. So there is a pitch,
right?
So it is not circular, it is not cyclic, but it is helical. Yes. Right. Mm-hmm. And helical gives, and the sari gives the beauty also, because when women wear it, even men, when they wear it, there is some, it's not exactly cyclic. Well, it is cyclic, but it is, especially it is helical. And helical is the beauty. And so now I think of the time, not circular, but and cyclic, of course, but helical particularly. So time, there is always pitch. So something is going to be different. It's not going to be the same. Right. There will be repeat of certain things, but we have changed and everything has changed. So I think, if nobody has used this phrase before, then I think that the world moves in helical.
That's interesting.
Helical sense. If there is a circular cyclic, then it's helical cycle.
Yeah, I mean, well, there are people who have mentioned about various things. I mean, there are two time dimensions in some theories of physics. There is this whole idea that there is a trajectory which can be cyclic, but it also has certain variations. So maybe that can reconcile with your idea of the helical nature of time. Professor Balram, yeah. This was a wonderful interaction that helped us explore a number of aspects, I mean, relating to Ayurveda, modern science, along with a discussion on reconciling, ancient and contemporary explorations into the very nature of reality. And I particularly was fascinated by some of the ideas exchanged. Thank you, Professor Balram, for addressing the various facets of the subject.
Thank you very much for asking those questions. I think that's one of the things that happens to some of us who have been younger for longer time, to stop asking questions. So I think when people start asking questions, I think that just makes me, at least I feel, it makes me more learned as a part of it, because I learn together. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
I do hope that we can all bring together a comprehensive contemporary understanding and usage of ancient Indian knowledge, particularly in Ayurveda, and the exploration of nature of the reality itself for the betterment and advancement of mankind itself. Namaskar.
Very much looking forward to it. Namaste.
Thank you for watching. You can subscribe here and also hit the bell icon to make sure you get notified. To donate, please click this button.